Can you hear me all right? Yes. All right. My name is Kyle Cherek, and I'm the host of a television show on PBS called Wisconsin Foodie. How many of you are familiar with it? Oh, good. Oh, good. I also do many other projects, one of which is my great, great, great honor to host the Chef Demo Series here at Madison College, presented by Vollrath. And to my right is Chef Pierre Zimmerman, who I have, well, let's just say that it takes a lot for me to get goosebumps when I hear that I get to work with someone. But in his case, based on his accolades and acclaim and awards, I was absolutely delighted. Chef Pierre Zimmerman is the chef of La Fournette in Chicago, and then has a production baking facility, and is also an instructor at the French Baking School. Those are the modest things. The La Fournette is worth a pilgrimage if you have not been, and for many throughout the Midwest, it is in fact a spot of pilgrimage. He is also the recipient of the Coupe du Monde de la Boulangerie, which is essentially the World Baking Championship. He is a champion of that, both as a competitor and then as a coach, and was awarded the silver medal by the Ministry of France for technical skills in baking, which is one of the highest accommodations that that nation can bestow on a craftsman within baking. I would urge you to take the time to go to his biography or bio on the French Pastry School's page, because I could go on for about 7 more minutes with his accolades and accomplishments. But the true accolade and accomplishment is that he is one of the most humble and self-effacing and warm people that I think that I have met within this industry. So it's just been a delight to talk thus far and break bread and share a meal. And I came to know of him through one of his proteges. And if it's true that the one of the best biographies or about someone is the things that people have worked underneath you or have been mentored by that they say about you, then you are arrayed in stars, because Jean Webb of the North Shore Boulangerie in Milwaukee has nothing but wonderful things to say about you. So, Chef Zimmerman, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. It's my first time in Madison ever. Yes, I'm living in Chicago. We are living in Chicago. I moved from France 10 years, almost 10 years ago with my wife Michelle and our 2 sons. And before that, we used to run a family business in Alsace, which is east of France, next to Strasbourg. But you said I'm humble. I'm just a baker, and all the bakers are humble in general. You know, you have to wake up early. You don't have tons of people to talk with because everybody is sleeping while you're working. So this makes your life easy. You know, you can be humble because you don't have to talk with people.
Yeast is not that social.
On another side, I think truly that La Boulangerie, doing bread, is, of course, it's the story of my life. But I met so many bakers around the world, and I can say the talented bakers are very good bakers, are friendly bakers, because we share hard work. It's tough, you know, to wake up early every morning. It's tough to deal with living products and try to make a wonderful bread out of 4 ingredients, you know. Mm-hmm. On another side, it's also rewarding, you know. You love it. You love the faces when people come into your bakery and have a smile because they know they will buy something very good, you know. You're not working in a funeral, or you're not a banker, you know, where people are like look terrible when they come in.
No one ever left a bakery that smells good grumpy. It's impossible.
Yeah, just some days when you burn something, you see different faces, you know. But this is a part of my life too, you know.
Yeah. So talk about bringing the old world into the new world. And that transition, because you are a 4th generation baker, and you transitioned from, as you said, a very small village. You have a better way of explaining the size of that village. And then to come to Chicago, which is, I think, within the scheme of American cities, one of the 2 great metropolises. I would call New York and Chicago true metropolises. Boston is wonderful, LA is wonderful, Houston, so on and so forth. They're big, big, big cities. But where it's in Chicago and New York, there's the cleaning person and the stockbroker crossing the street together, whether they like it or not. There's that kind of mixture. So talk about that transition and continuing your art.
Yeah, so yeah, the side of my village is very special. Next to Strasbourg, I used to live 10 miles away from Strasbourg in a small village called Schnersheim. Today I use it as a password because nobody who can hack that name, you know. But
now you've just told everybody with cameras.
But yeah, and what is very cool is that it was so small, 400 people. So if you don't break when you come in, you pass the village and you're outside on the other side, you know. So you have to be ready to stop at the right moment. But yeah, going from a small village like that where not much happens, you know, life is always the same. Everybody knows each other. Sometimes it's a very bad story if everybody knows what you do.
Right.
But and then you move to an American city that is running crazy 24 hours a day, with 3 million people talking another language, with another food culture, with other. No, I'm lost still with Fahrenheit and temperatures like that, and you have to adapt yourself. But being a baker, you work very close to the nature because you deal with 4 ingredients, like I said, and the main ingredient is flour. So if the miller, or before the miller, if the farmer is not doing the right job, you cannot make a good bread. You are part of a chain, you know, and you need these guys doing a good job before you. We don't use improvers. We don't use chemicals. We don't use artificial flavors. We don't use any of that. But if I buy flour loaded with all these chemicals, I can pretend what I want, you know. It's not right. So as I moved to the US, I had to identify our vendors. You know?
How did you source those?
So the chance was to work at the French pastry school because they already did a part of the job. And then as we started with the project, we started to do some research. We did tests, and being a chef at the school while I was working on the project of opening the bakery was a unique chance. I was on site. I had all the equipment to do tests. And I contacted companies and said, hey, can you send me samples? And we tried products like that.
Well, and you had Jackie and Sebastian, the 2 founders of the French Pastry School. Jackie Pfeiffer, you may know, won the James Beard Award for Best Cookbook 2 years ago, I believe. And Sebastian is awarded a MOF in France. So these are, you had some great colleagues to test and experiment with.
Yes, exactly. It was a real teamwork. But not only our flavor was our idea about bread is important. Of course, we do a selection, but it has also to fit to what people expect from us, you know. I didn't change a lot compared to what we used to do in France. I had more to adapt, for example, the hydration of the recipes because the flour was stronger than what I used to have. But what we try to reproduce, this is to try an authentic, to bring something that is true, that is made. It's made here, but if you close your eyes, you should think that it's a real French baguette made in France. And this is very hard. And we were not only Jackie, Sebastian, and I, but also Michel, our families, and then the students. We didn't kill anybody, so it's good, you know, during the process. But of course,
it's a pretty low bar, chef. I have to say, that's a pretty low bar.
So, but the students loved also to give their opinion, you know, and we made surveys and we asked them how they feel it, and so because this is also important to me, you know, not only what I love is important, but also and more importantly, what my customer love, you know. My grandfather used to say, don't kill your customer, you know, and it's right, you know. It's good to find new customers, but you better keep your existing customer alive for a long time.
It was a metaphor, not figurative. I see,
No,
okay,
no,
not
yeah.
literally, figuratively.
But no, it's not just a metaphor, because when I'm talking about, you know, all these ingredients, these improvers and everything that you can put in dough right now, this kills your customer slowly day after day, and they don't even notice it. They say thank you, you know, and this is terrible. Then you're a murderer in a long process, but you still do. Yeah. This is what I hate, and the philosophy that is the philosophy of our family since generations now, since the bakery, as we sold the bakery in France, the bakery was 110 years old. And I grew up in that environment, not 110 years. No. But I continue, and we continue to do exactly the same way in Chicago, on a higher scale. But there is no product coming out of the bakery with the same philosophy. If we cannot do it, if some people ask us to do something that we cannot do it with our way of doing bread, I don't do it. I say, okay, maybe one of my colleagues is ready to do it for you, but I'm sorry, but doing bread in 1.5 hours, I cannot do that. I'm sorry. A baguette takes 3 days. I'm sorry. It's the time it takes, you know. And then some chefs are turning mad because they call you, 5 minutes before the service starts, and they say, I need bread. Can you bake something for me? Of course, I can bake bread in 5 minutes, you know.
They don't get you. Yeah, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number.
I say, okay, there is probably a Walgreens next door. You can find some bread.
Try La Brea. I think she does something that you can.
No, but honestly, I think the new generation of baker, because I'm not here on a mission, like I said. I just continue to do what I used to do since ever, and what my family used to do since ever. But what is great today, this is that right now I'm surrounded in the US with a lot of talented American chefs. They have the exact same spirit. Mm-hmm. They come back to something that is exactly what I love, you know. Being a part of this Bread Bakers Guild, I met so many of these good bakers, and you talked about Gene in your city. These guys are career changers, and they decided to do the right stuff. Mm-hmm. And I have so much admiration for those guys. You cannot believe me. You know, this is the hope for the future. You know, we have to come back to something that is eating just simple good bread, simple good food. You know, it's not complicated. It takes just time.
Yeah. So you reminded me in telling your story of a question that I've asked. Other pastry chefs and acclaimed ones and bakers. I've asked this of Jackie. I've asked this of Gail Gand. I've asked this of a few others. America is a very young country. And you were talking about your family tradition. The bakery was 110 years old. And there's thousands of bakeries like that in France. This was not an anomaly. Here we would go, oh, wow. You know, San Francisco sourdough goes back 100 years. Meh. And in France, this is not, or Germany, or Italy, or any of these countries. Does America have a baking tradition? Does America have a pastry tradition?
So I think there was something lost as the industrialization with the industry. Mm-hmm. The industry came much faster. So there was no way to build a tradition in bread in the US before the industry took over all the process. This is why it was too fragile and couldn't survive, or survived just a little bit. But right now, with this new generation of baker, we're coming back to something. And I met a few of these big bakers, you know, running plants, making millions of breads a day. For us, I say always, okay, I'm a microbe compared to you, you know. Yeah. But these guys, they fear really all these microbes now, because this is the new way to bake bread in the US in the future. And it's a chance for everybody, you know. I think it's great, you know, to come back to more local producers, to go to next door, you know, to see your baker, and you see the guy working and shaping this bread, and not this coming out of freezers or whatever, or out of long chains of industrial processes, you know. So there was no history like in Europe, just because it's a young country. But now it's time to build the history of the future, you know? We're in the 21st century. I don't say that we have to continue to bake bread like my grandfather did bread. We use modern equipment. We are modern bakers. We have to make money, because otherwise we don't pay our bills and we disappear. But even with this way to adapt our craft, we will be modern bakers for the future, but still using traditional and authentic recipes and healthy recipes.
So 2 more questions, and then let's get to baking or making. Whose bread do you admire, and what is your favorite part about working with students?
So I don't really admire my bread, because I'm.
Do you need a hug?
No, just because I'm very hard with myself every morning, you know.
No, I understand that.
And I have a good excuse every morning. Every morning
you start all over again.
I eat a croissant every morning, and so my guys look at me and I say, quality control. I say, just because I want a croissant, you know. But but I'm very hard with myself, and I'm never 100% happy with what I do. And when I'm happy, I share it with my team, because, like I said, it's the result of multiple hands. It's not just one person. It's the guy who mixed, the guy who shaped, the guy who baked. It's sometimes me helping, but these guys, they all also. You know, I say if La Fournette is considered as one of the best bakeries in Chicago, it's the result of all of our hard work. It's not just my name or whatever. It's your job too. But besides that, I have a few places that I love, but it's always related to the chef. You know, I'm a very sensible person, so when I love the chef, I love his product.
I have this too. When people ask, "What's your favorite restaurant?" It's my favorite people is really what it is. Yes.
So it's not always the most popular baker, but a friend or a guy that. Like Gene, you know, Gene is for me the perfect example. He started late in his life to be a baker, but in a few years, he reached a level that some bakers don't reach in their whole life, you know, because he had a dream, and he followed his dream, and he worked hard to reach that.
Gene is a protege of Chef Zimmerman's, and he has a bakery in Milwaukee, about 12 blocks from my home, called North Shore Boulangerie. And the students that are here, I brought his bread in today for Chef. But he came to Chef and the French pastry school midlife and had not baked much before, had taken a few little weekend classes. And now I think, and many agree, is perhaps the preeminent or one of the top 3 bakeries in Milwaukee, and is exceptional. Yeah.
So, and you asked me what makes me happy to share with students, or why it's so important to me. So 2 reasons. The first is that my 2 grandfathers, one was a baker and one was a teacher, and I probably a mix between those 2 guys. But more importantly, I consider that if we don't share, so I started, I was 15, and I made millions of mistakes, you know. I burned tons of bread. But why should we keep that experience just for us? Why couldn't we help kids to reach that level faster? And I'm very concerned about that, you know. I don't plan to bake 50 more years, and some days when I will be retired, I hope to be able to find a good bakery somewhere. So we have to teach the next generation to do the good bread for tomorrow, you know. But it's also, I think with our background and the chefs like me, what is very important is that we show them that it's a way of life, and it's a way to have success. but also not to be a poor baker, with never. You have to show that that business plan is something that makes you succeed, to be a happy baker, but also to be a happy owner of a business and happy in your family and happy in your life. If you don't reach that, you miss something. You know that if you start to be an artisan baker, that you will spend a lot of hours in your bakery. So you better find a place where you're happy to be.
Yes.
But besides that, you have to share that with your family, and you have to live in good harmony with that. You wake up early. So I said sometimes it's probably a natural way of contraception, you don't sleep at the same time as your wife. So you have not a big risk to have too many kids.
But you have two. You have two.
Yeah, I crossed my wife 2 times. No, but yeah. No, but seriously, we have to show. If we don't show that it's a way of life to be a good and an artisan baker and to do the right thing, that this can be successful for you, who wants to do that job? Nobody. It's very hard. You work hard to be a baker.
The hours are incredible. Yeah, you have to love it, or you would never do it. It would be a form of punishment, actually. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay. Let's start with the recipe, right?
Okay. So you have quite an array here, Chef, and I know you have 2 recipes. So are you making the cocktails first, or the breads?
No. Today I will build a macaron.
Okay.
And 1.5 years ago, I created a line of macaron called Chin Chin Mixology Macaron. I wanted to do a macaron that when you bite in that macaron, it's like having a drink, So I created a line with the six first, where Pina Colada, Cointrepolitan, Moscow Mule, and so on. Tonight, I will present my favorite. This is the Koval Rye macaron. So it's a macaron done with a rye whiskey from Koval. It's an organic whiskey from Chicago. The owner of this distillery is a woman, and I think she brings a lot of sensibility in the way she makes the whiskey.
I wish they were closer to our house. When the show first began, we wanted to do a show on it, and we're called Wisconsin Foodie, and of course they're in Chicago. So then the Secretary of Tourism said, "We're happy to sponsor the show, but if you cross the state border, I'll kill you." And so,
you change your mind.
Yes, right. Yes.
Yeah. So here, for example, the goal when you want to recreate the real experience, you have to start with the same ingredients. Doing a macaron with an average whiskey will give you an average
flavor.
An average flavor. If you use an extremely good whiskey, you have to find a solution to keep that wonderful flavors. If you cover it with strong chocolate, you'd kill everything. If you cover it with spices or whatever, then you have to find a real balance, and you have to build a recipe to try to give the same experience. For example, in the Cointrepolitan, the Cointreau is the key, but we need it a little bit stronger. So Cointreau is doing for us a Cointreau that is higher in alcohol. So this makes that we have stronger flavors with less liquid, because an addition of too much liquid will create a problem in the process. But here, let's start with the filling. What is important here, I do a caramel. So the most basic way to do filling out of alcohol is do a ganache. So you boil cream, you pour it over dark chocolate, and then you add brandy. This works.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. But in that case, if you want to give first the flavor of the whiskey before giving the flavor of the chocolate, you have to find a way, and you have to find the flavors that you find also in a brandy. So like a little bit the caramel, like a little bit the milk chocolate. So if you check the recipe, I have a mix between dark chocolate and milk chocolate, and I do a caramel out of, first a caramel with a sugar.
How many iterations did it take for you to get to this balance?
So sometimes you're lucky, you know, you try and
boom.
You're good. And sometimes it takes for weeks, you know, because you start and start again. And then the best way is sometimes to stop. You put it on the side and you start again 6 weeks later because you're completely lost. Yeah. But let me start with these immediately. In the recipe, you guys have the recipe, right? Do you? No.
So I loved talking to Chef about this before, and I said, I was assuming, oh, this is like many things where they have that boozy or wine flavor, but the alcohol evaporates off. And he said, oh, no, they're loaded with booze.
Yes. Like I said, I should probably card the customers, you know. But anyway, I send the recipe to, there is probably a way to, I'm ready to share the recipe. It is not a secret. So you guys, I will ask the organization. So you'll find a way to.
Yes, share it with
everyone. You should harass them so they give you the recipe. But anyway, so here I do have glucose. So what is glucose? It's a simple sugar. So it's a sugar that doesn't crystallize. So but I use here glucose not because of that. I use glucose because it brings sweetness, but it's not as sweet as regular sugar. So I need the texture of the glucose. You see, it's a little bit like honey, but it is not that sweet. Huh? And since it's a little bit thick, I will just give a simmer to the cream and melt the glucose in the same time. Huh?
And of course, being in Wisconsin, you have access to great cream.
Yes, I hope so. Okay. In the same time, I have here, so let's prepare the chocolate. So I have here dark chocolate and milk chocolate. And these will be ready. You'll see when you have the formula, these will be ready here. I have some butter and I have whiskey a little bit, you know. I have always a full bottle because the rest is for the chef, you know. So, but after the demo, so otherwise I start to speak in Chinese or. You know.
Your Alsatian accent gets much stronger.
So, while this is warming up, I start to cook my caramel. So I just melt sugar direct on the stove. Oh, it is in. So what is important? I know it's always who is familiar to cook caramel? You? Okay. Who burn caramel? Okay. This is what I. Okay. Yes. So my way to do caramel, you know, I see this is the full amount that I have. I start maybe with 1/5 of it, no more, 20%. Huh? And I let melt this slowly. What happens if you burn the first part and you say, okay, I will add more sugar to bring it lighter? No. It's over. You better throw that away and start the process again. Huh? So this is very important. And never try. And you know, it's also remember that it's better to restart with a little bit sugar. This doesn't cost you that much. If you mess up the whole recipe with all the whiskey and everything, then it costs you a lot. So this has to melt slowly. Yeah? So here you need a little bit time. It takes always a little bit time to start to melt. And when you deglaze the caramel, you have to have something that is almost at simmering. If this is cold, you make chunks out of this caramel. This has to be boiling, and then you can pour it in 2 times into that pan. Huh?
It's the reverse of when you're pouring in the hot cream with eggs. You can make scrambled eggs. You have to cool it down first, temper it. Yes. Reverse tempering, really.
So here, it will always melt a little bit on the side first. Of course, Nowadays, an induction stove is a little bit easier for that, but it works perfectly on traditional.
And you have an induction, Vollrath induction there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will use it for the Macaron Shells.
A quick little plug for Vollrath, and I'm happy to do it. We received, actually we have 2 of those Vollrath induction burners, and we could not have cooked Thanksgiving without them. We have a 4-burner gas and an oven, but those saved my skin. And my wife and I only had one argument during all of Thanksgiving. And I credit that to Vollrath induction.
Yeah, induction is a great, specifically if you want to control exactly the temperature, because the heat is the same absolutely everywhere. So here you see I don't start to mix. It's melting on the side. I shake a little bit my sugar, but I have to wait until all of that sugar is melted before I add a new part of it.
Chef, when did you know that you wanted to commit your life to baking and to pastry as a certain extent of baking?
So, like I said, I grew up in the middle of flour, and I always loved to do that. And then I went to high school in Alsace, where I was there the whole week. And coming home on Saturdays was my best moment of the week, not only because I came home, because I came also back to these flavors, smelling the bread and everything. So year after year, I understood that this is what makes me the most happy. I was not a bad student at school, and as I told them that I will start an apprenticeship instead of going to a university, the teachers talked with my parents, say, hey, this is not normal. This guy should not be a baker. He should.
But you came from you were the 4th generation, would be the 4th generation bakers.
Exactly, and I was lucky because other parents would have said, yes, I understand,
Right.
But my father said, hey, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it works for us.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was, I think, at that moment that I really discovered how much I love. During the week, I was missing this life, to be in a bakery. You wake up in the morning, you have these smells of the bread. So you see now, I start to have this caramel. It's blonde. Don't wait that it turns too dark, but you have to wait until the grains are all melted. So it's very liquid, and you see, I moved away.
Can you see it in these cameras? Yeah.
I moved away from the heat to be able to control the heat on the side. And now I can add a little bit more. But you have to start with a very small quantity. And the more you have here, then the faster you can add the rest of your recipe. We do a lot of recipes based on caramel for a few reasons. First, it brings down the sweetness of the sugar because you burn a part of it. So you bring a little bit bitterness, and you lose the sweetness. So this makes that your pastry is less sweet.
I've never thought about that, but when the sugar goes through the Maillard transition, it releases more flavors.
Yes.
And it also brings the sweetness down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just as when meat is cooked, it releases something like 300 more flavonoids than uncooked meat, which is why we all love cooked meat.
And it's not in your body again exactly like sugar. You don't bring that much. So it takes a little bit time, but this is the magic of it. What is important is to have, you see, I have a small quantity of sugar, but I have a big pan. Because when I will pour that into this, it will boil a lot. If you have a small pan, you have 2 hours to clean your kitchen,
Where do you see baking and pastry going as you are now teaching and meeting so many of the students that you were talking about, the next generation when you're retired?
You know, I think we will have this magic happen like it happens everywhere in the world. You know, seeing young small businesses succeeding, doing great things, being popular, because a baker is not a guy that is exposed like a chef, you know, to Michelin stars and whatever. You know, he's more. It's a little bit like the product, you know. We do bread, you know. We don't pretend to do.
Well, that's what I was saying before when we were talking, that bread is very pedestrian and proletariat, but everyone knows good bread, and most people, maybe they don't know really good bread, but they know bad bread.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've all said, oh, okay, I'm settling because I'm hungry, but I'm not happy. Yeah.
And what is great, you know, and this is why this is a real hope for the next generation. Good bread is extremely addictive. When you start to love good bread, you cannot eat bad bread again. You know, you better don't eat bread.
Yeah.
We have a chef. He said, okay, let's try 1 week to serve your bread as table bread in our restaurant, just to see. But you're very expensive, you know. I don't think that I will do that in the long run. And he's doing this since 5 years because he couldn't stop, you know. And it's great for us.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. We were just in New Orleans, my wife and I, and there, where there's such a great baking tradition, but it's this strange melange of obviously the Cajun cooking and the French tradition that was there and the Spanish that came through.
Right.
But because of the humidity and because the wheat is entirely different, their version of great bread, which is really good, is so different than my version of great bread. But we were with some locals who were saying, this is the best bread that we have. And I was thinking, this is a little... This is what I would call cheap grocery store bread. But I understand with the humidity and other things that this is probably, for a long time with the traditional methods, the best bread you could get with the baking here.
You have to understand that the bread tradition is always the result of a local system, you know. You have the farmers growing wheat next to you, you have a mill, and then you have a baker. And in the past, there was no way to buy flour from the other side of the world. So it's always based on what is locally available.
Right.
I was in Ethiopia, and the most popular bread is something that I wouldn't even serve to my mother-in-law to kill her, you know. It's true, you know. It's terrible. It's sour. You cannot imagine. But when it's done, it's super hard. It's cooked like a crepe. But it's when done, you serve it with their local food. It's great. But when you taste it alone, oh my gosh, it's terrible.
Is it the kind that sort of spongy that helps eat the food?
Yeah.
Can't remember what it's called. There's an Ethiopian restaurant that.
Injera.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
And injera contains 40% of sourdough. You know, so it's super strong.
Yeah.
You know? And it's cooked like a pancake. Yeah?
Right.
And it's super complicated. In that area, they had to do injera as a part of the competition, and the most of the teams failed because of the injera, because it's super hard to do it the right way. But I was in charge to taste the product. Believe me, I was just happy when it was done, you know. Because it's not my culture, you know, and I think it's not right to ask us to grade something that we don't know exactly. We had a local baker, and I asked him what he means about, you know, and he taught me the real characteristics of. So here you see now I'm completely done with my sugar. I have a blonde caramel here, very liquid, no chunks. And now it's time to add the boiling or the simmering cream with the glucose. Huh? So I do it in 2 times, and I'm not on the heat.
Smells good, doesn't it? Can you get any of that? Yeah.
So and also what happens here when you do caramel like that, the glucose makes that you don't burn too much the cream, because sometimes when you burn the cream in the caramel, the cow flavors comes out. Sometimes it's not exactly what you look in a whiskey, you know.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're singeing the fat, and so the proteins that hang on to the flavor is what comes forward.
Exactly. So here you see
science, people, science.
And it's just cooking, you know, just cooking. So here you see now I have my caramel with my cream. I don't have to cook it more than that, you know. I want just to make sure I'm able to incorporate my cream in good conditions and I don't have any chunks. Huh? At that point, if you have a small batch like this, you can pour it immediately on the chocolate. If you cook a bigger batch, all this heat would burn a part of the chocolate. So you have to let cooling down. But here, since this container is also cold, it will absorb a part of the heat. I will not have a big problem so I can then pour my caramel over my chocolate. So if you don't have like small drops or pieces of chocolate like that, I would always recommend just to chop it. Don't melt it because you have enough heat. You don't have to melt the chocolate first. Huh? And here also, when you start, you want just to give time to the chocolate to melt in good conditions. Don't start to whip like crazy. The risk that you would have is to separate the fat from the cream with the chocolate. You want to do an emulsion, you know. Again, it just I have to
very
put that,
gentle. Yeah.
It's just science. You go slowly, and you have a nice emulsion. In our bakery, we are non-GMO, so I have for example, no chocolate with soy lecithin. I have only chocolate with sunflower lecithin, but it works. You know, we don't need to add a lot of lecithin into a process like that just because the formula works. You know, at that point, and you see, I have butter and I have whiskey. If the whiskey. Don't add it when you boil it because you would lose the alcohol. You know, I will keep it in my process. You know, so at that point, same for the butter. I want to add the butter so it can just melt, but I will not boil my butter because I would change the flavor of my butter. Huh? I want to keep that buttery flavor.
But you're not temping this as often as done in pastry to check the temp to see if it's okay to melt. You're just kind of going by feel.
Yes, exactly. In a small recipe like that, if you follow the process like this, it's very simple, you know, because you have no risk because of the small quantity. For a big one, we check, we say, okay, we add the butter when we are at 35 degrees Celsius, and not more nor less. Yeah, okay. Because we know that there is...
just under 100, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We know that there is enough heat to melt it perfectly, but the heat will not destroy the flavors of the butter. Right. In bigger batches, it's very important. In a small one, here we are at that point. You know, it's a little bit warm, but it's okay. You know, because, and you see, I start to have a very nice nice cream. And you don't add, of course, you cannot add the whiskey before your butter is completely melted, because this would cool it down too much, and then you would keep the chunks of the butter. So
this is not unlike bread, where if you mess it up in the first step, you're exponentially screwed.
Yeah.
By the end.
If you burn the caramel, you're screwed too, you know?
Yeah.
So no. So, you know, if you do small recipes like that, like I said, it's never lost. You know, you find always someone to eat it. You know, you can choose, you know, if it's your best friend or the guy who ticketed you yesterday, you know. But yeah, here, the pastry, doing pastry like that is precision, you know. We work by the gram. temperature Celsius, and we try to be very precise just because of that. It's very important, huh? And so you can reproduce that every single day, and you have the exact same result. Because this is our goal. We want to be consistent, you know. And once we have a good formula, we want to be able to reproduce that multiple times.
Well, because a lot of people are going to buy these macarons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they want to bring them to the next party and the next party.
Yes, exact. We produce right now at La Fournette between 10 and 15,000 macarons a day, and
those are these, you know, right? How many of you love macarons? Yeah. Okay. So, well, all of us, the hands that came up, we could probably eat 10 or 15,000. If we all got on a bus and went to La Fournette, we could consume one day's worth.
Yeah, you better be very hungry, but yeah, why not? So what is important also, this is now, you know, since we don't use like additional of lecithin or so, we want to, I have to blend that so it gives the real creaminess when it's cold, you know. If you just whip it, if you whip it with a whisk, it's bad because you incorporate a lot of air. If you use an immersion blender, you create a real emulsion. You do it, the particles of water and fat are much smaller. Huh?
But I got one from my wife for Christmas, and it's changed my life. Immersion blenders are the greatest thing ever, or one of.
So before you touch here with the finger, you unplug the blender, right? Because the fingers don't come twice, you know? Right?
As far as I know.
Yeah, I have my 10 for the moment, so I try to keep them, right?
This is a fun food history fact. RoboCoupe, you all know RoboCoupe. This is a RoboCoupe immersion blender. They're famous for their big mixer, right? The Cuisinarts that you have at home are just, well, originally in 1974, when the gentleman went over to France, the American, and discovered RoboCoupes, they're just RoboCoupe engines is minis. He came over, brought them to the States, repackaged them, needed a new name, bought the engines, and Cuisinart was born. Williams-Sonoma was the first retailer to pick them up, and the first year they sold terribly. However, they were also priced at, back in 1974, at $140, which was an awful lot of money in those days.
Yeah, RoboCoupe is very expensive, but on a professional side, you know,
nothing's the same. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so now this is the ganache is like that at that point, and it's of course it's too runny to be piped into a shell. So this comes now overnight in a cooler. I cooked some yesterday. I don't know where we have it, but a little bit later I will show you how it turns after a few hours.
Is this it,
yes.
Chef? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You see, this is now the ganache. Let me show you the texture of that ganache. When it's cold, it's a little bit too cold to be piped, but you see, it's very like a spread. And only.
I'm just hoping I get to lick the spatula.
Okay, I put a name on it here. Sorry. So yeah, these in a container like that, overnight in the cooler. You can prepare it if you have left. You know, if someday you don't use everything, you can put it in a very small container and freeze it. The day when you want to use it, the day before you put it back in the cooler and it's ready to go. So nothing is lost, you know. But in general, when you do it at home, nothing is lost, right? Everything is.
Yes.
So, but you see, the way to this is now what I call a caramel milk chocolate ganache. This is a base. It works perfectly with all the brandies like Cognac whiskey, all these distilled, these brandies. These are a little bit brown brandies.
Right. Yeah, whiskeys, bourbons, cognacs. Who knows the difference between cognac and brandy? Yes. Well, it is, but cognac has to be made in cognac. And when you step outside of cognac, it suddenly becomes brandy. Yeah. It's the same with the Bordeaux wine, where they change the designation of what is Bordeaux every couple of years, and there are winemakers that have sued sued officials saying, wait, we were Bordeaux a couple of years ago, now we're not, but that's the designation. The grapes don't know.
Yes. So on that side, this is the shell of the macaron. So what is a macaron? Not a macaroon. A macaron is a very simple sandwich cookie. 2 shells done out of a meringue, but a meringue with almonds. This is the base, and then a filling in the middle. For me, a macaron has to be an explosion of flavor, because you have only 2 chances. It's a 2-bite cookie, or maybe a 1-bite if you're very
right.
But you have to have the experience right away. Not you have not 5 times chance to. So it has to be immediate. So this is why I mean that the success of a macaron is that people have to bite into that, and you have to say wow. And if you don't have that wow factor, then there is no way to make a macaron. Then do something else, But you have you saw the amount of whiskey in the recipe. But at the end, in one bite, a macaron is like something like 10 grams a shell, so 20 grams a shell and 20 grams filling, so 40 grams total. So out of 40 grams, you have 50% of filling, and you have 20% of alcohol in that, 40% of. So at the end, it's a drop of whiskey. So, but you have the better you have to have the good flavor right away. So I think this is the beauty of the macaron. It seems very simple. Yeah, I have. It seems very simple, but the key is that when we do it with fruits, we use the best fruit purees. When we do it with chocolate, we use the best chocolate, and so on. And this is only the way, if you want to sell macaron one time and do a lot of money, you use the cheapest ingredients, you sell a lot, and you disappear, and you run. On another side, if you want to do it like a business plan, you better have customers coming and coming again. So here, like I said, the recipe that I have here, this is in a small quantity, the exact same that we do in a big batch at the bakery. I just divided the recipe. But it's the exact same process. We work on an Italian meringue. Do you know what is an Italian meringue, guys? So it's like a meringue whipped. So an Italian meringue is a meringue that you do with cooked sugar. So you cook a syrup and you pour the syrup into the egg white.
Okay.
A French meringue is a lazy one. You add just the sugar into the white,
Okay.
So we are French, But
that's interesting because usually the Italians are the ones that go take a nap or something.
Yeah. This is why. So that way it goes a little bit faster. This is why they are faster to take a nap after that, But no. And then you have the Swiss meringue, which is you cook the sugar and the white. You bring that to a certain temperature and then you whip them. This is the Swiss meringue. But the Italian meringue is the most consistent way to do a good meringue for macaron. I tried multiple recipes, and for a small recipe like that, or even a very big batch, it's the most consistent way to control the texture of the macaron. So I have here the sugar.
And this is on induction where you have absolute control.
Yes, exact.
Wonderful.
Here, what is great, I can even choose the temperature. I have to forward temp.
Oh, you wanted it.
Okay, here Fahrenheit, Celsius.
Celsius, he's delighted because there's a Celsius setting.
I love that, This is on my wish list, So 120 degrees. 120 degrees in wait, I have the conversion in Fahrenheit.
240?
248.
248.
Not far away, right?
Not bad.
So is a texture, you bring there is still 5 to 6% of water remaining in the syrup. And it makes that if this cools down, it takes a texture like a little bit like the glucose you saw. It's very thick and like a paste. If you continue to cook it and the rest of the humidity goes out, you make a candy. So at 148, we call that le grand cassé. This is the highest stage for cooked sugar. You have then like a real candy. It cracks under your teeth. And this would stick on your teeth.
Okay.
So in the same time, I will have here, let me start with the tip temps pourtant. I have here almond flour and I have confectionery sugar. Let me just stop with that. So here what is important, this is the same quantity. I have here 250 grams, 250 grams. And I use a blender. I will just have to blend that to make sure that the confectionery sugar is perfectly mixed with the almond flour. So this is very important. Don't think that I will just sift it together and I'm good. No, we have to blend it because the friction will also make that the sugar will stick around the oil, and so the oil will not be released too quickly in the meringue. Because if the oil comes, if fat comes into a meringue, the meringue will deflate very quickly.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So it's very important to blend it. Huh? And what is very important is the quality of the almond flour. When you buy very cheap almond flour, they press the almond flour to remove the part of the oil, and they sell these for your skin creams and everything, but you don't have it in your almonds anymore.
Oh, you need it.
You need it. It's very healthy, and it brings the moisture of the shell. So non-pressed almond flour, and then the percentage. Yeah.
Sorry, what's a good brand?
So we use. Yes, you're right. So we worked with a farm near San Francisco called Aldrin Brothers. You can buy even online in smaller packages. We buy per 2 tons at the time, but you can have you would have a problem at home with 2 tons of.
Comes with a big scoop though, so it's fine. A really big scoop.
But Aldrin, Aldrin Brothers, and these guys. They can control the humidity because the second most important part in almond flour is the percentage of humidity. Our almond flour that they deliver is at 3.5% of humidity, and this is the key. If there is too much humidity, you have too much water in your recipe. If it's too dry, it will make a batter that is too stiff, and you don't have a nice shell. So here,
look for the oil stains on the bag, right?
Yeah, but the humidity is never never it's a small level. The most of the time when you buy a small container, it's not. But there are probably other very good companies doing this, but this is the one we work with, and since we work with them, they're extremely consistent in quality. Sure. I love these guys. I have to give them a visit one of these days. And our chocolate, the chocolate we work with is also from the San Francisco area. Really? It's a Guittard. And these guys do non-GMO chocolate with very high quality chocolates. And I have here the caramel. So in my recipe, I have a brown caramel. This is to give the brown color to the shell. Huh?
How did you brown it versus what you made over here, chef? Yeah,
you see that color?
Yeah.
When you cook that, you better be alone and you open the windows because it's smoking like crazy, Right now, I have to be honest, there is a company in the suburbs in Chicago, they do the caramel color for us. They cook the sugar.
So they have all their windows open all the time.
Yes, yeah. And as possible as far away from my home, because but here the goal is to bring just the color. I don't want to add additional sweetness or whatever. So I use definitely the caramel exactly just like a food coloring, but 100% natural. And this one is made out of cane sugar and not corn syrup, because we are non-GMO. So I can continue now but I will prepare my. Here I have a second part. I have a first part of egg whites here. Second part of egg whites will be whipped. This is the part for the meringue. So I have this on that side. So
this is the lazy French version?
No, this is the Italian one.
Okay,
okay. No.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Your words.
You have it was a good question, just to see if I'm still awake.
Exactly. Yes.
In general, bakers at that time start to sleep. Okay, so here out of that, what is important, I want to make a paste out of it. So it's a little bit difficult for a small batch. You can do it. For a small batch, you can do it by hand, like I do here. For bigger batches, we do it with in a machine like that with a paddle attachment, not a whisk, because everything would stick into the.
Right.
So and you see, it's dark, but at the end, my shells will not be that dark because I will incorporate more of that. So, but you see, this is a little bit the type of texture I'm looking for. And like I said, in general, it's 50% of the egg whites are coming into that part. 50% of the egg whites are done for the meringue. So, and this can sit a little bit. It's not a big problem. It's good because you can prepare that on the side. I want to pour that sugar when the sugar reaches 120 degrees. I want to pour it into the egg white, but the egg white has to be whipped at 50 to 60%. If it's not whipped and you pour it, you don't have volume. And if it's over whipped, your egg whites are whipped at 100% and you pour the hot sugar, it will just deflate.
Yeah.
So if it's just growing at that moment and you pour the hot sugar, it will even give more volume.
Yeah.
So what I do,
like a souffle, really.
I have here 110. So at 110, I start to whip at 110, and when my sugar reaches 120, I can pour it. But this is a very small recipe for that size of bowl, so I have to hold maybe a little bit. Here also, so what's happening if, for example, you're over the temperature. If you're at 125 or 130, what can you do? Add just a few drops of water, because at that point, the temperature only rises because the humidity, the water evaporates. So if you add water again, you will cool. It's not cooling down. It's not like a full bottle of water in your sugar, just a few drops, and then you can bring it back to the right temperature.
It has to put its energy into evaporating off the sugar or the water, and so
yeah. And what is so the key is here to find the right balance between at what moment your equipment needs to be turned on, so you don't have to play around with that, So you're good. As soon as you reach the right volume here, you can pour the sugar. But Italian meringue is great for multiple recipes. In cakes, when you do a mousse, an Italian meringue is great because it's more stable, because you already cooked the sugar. So you gave strength to this pasty sugar that you cooked will help the recipe to hold together.
Right. So when you make this meringue in your production facility, it must be
Yeah, it's a big bowl.
A lot.
Yeah, our batch is based on is 20 times this. So
Sure.
it's 5 kilos of almond flour, 5 kilos of sugar, 5 kilos of cooked sugar, and it gives 1,100 shells. But with the exact same recipe.
But those are hand piped, no?
So the shells are not hand piped. We use a depositor because we have to be very consistent in size. But all the fillings are hand piped and assembled. And so you see here, I don't know if we start to have the right volume, and at that point I can add my sugar. So I will pour my sugar very slowly. There is just one small hole here, and you go slowly and always at the same spot, and slowly. If you pour it too quickly, you will touch the whisk, and the whisk will put all your sugar around your bowl, and you have drops of sugar everywhere. I see that Madame in front of me knows exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Is this something you've lived yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and specifically when you have to wash the bowl after that, you know, you have the sugar sticking everywhere. So yeah, it's important to go slowly. I had a little bit crystallization. If you have some crystals, don't put them into the batter. It's better to lose a little bit sugar than to have crystals into the recipe. Yeah? Okay, so here I'm almost done with that macaron shell recipe. The most important part is coming now, is what we call the macaronage. So the macaronage is mixing these two together, and then you have to know at what moment you have to stop. Because you start with a high volume that will not give you a right macaron texture. A macaron shell has to be a little bit crisp outside and moist inside.
How far, Chef, how far does the macaron go back? Is it pre-carême or is it around that era? How historically?
Oh, no, it's not that old. It's I think the real Parisian macaron is something like 60 years old, maybe not
Really?
more. Yeah,
Oh,
it's very contemporary. And there was one house, one pastry shop in Paris that was the only one doing macarons without interruption all that time. It's La Maison La Durée on the Champs-Élysées. But the chef who brought macarons to a new extra level is Pierre Zimmermann.
yeah.
Pierre is a long-time friend. He's from Alsace too. So I forgot to tell you that I'm coming from Alsace, and you have to remember that we call Alsace the promised land. You know. So
In baking.
who said that I was humble? I don't remember. Someone said that. Yeah, so Pierre, Pierre Zimmermann is a pastry chef in Paris. He's known as he's called as a Picasso of the pastry. He's very famous. He has multiple shops in Japan too, very popular. But he started his apprenticeship in Paris, Place de la Madeleine, and he was very quickly a pastry chef. And he started out of macaron, you know, it's colorful, it's flavorful, there is something to do. And he started to create recipes with uncommon flavors. He put a lot of energy in creation, and he made out of traditional Parisian macaron a very sexy cookie. And this started to be, you know, a success not just in France but worldwide.
Right.
And the good news, you know, because a lot of people love to eat macaron, and then they want to say, hey, this is super expensive. You know, I will not spend $2 per macaron. I will do that at home myself, and then they discover how hard it is, and then they come back to the shop. You know.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's great. I love, you know, I love macarons too because because of that reason. It's a small bite. It shows the excellence of what you can do out of a few products, and you don't eat 500 grams, you know.
Right.
Of course, you can eat multiple macarons. The more you eat, the better it is for me, right? But I love that idea to finish every meal with, like, you know, in France, when you order an espresso at the end of, when you order they give you a small square of chocolate, you know?
Yeah.
It's just that small bite that changes your experience. And a macaron for me is that, you know? And there is no limit in creation. And if you travel around the world and you see all these different fruits and other products, every time you say, hey, I should try a macaron out of that, you know? So now we have here the two bases, you know. This is my almond paste, you know, very sticky and thick. And here I have my very light meringue. So how can I mix those together? I don't think if I put immediately all of that into that it works. I have to do it in 2 times at least, maybe 3 times, to bring these 2 textures to the right level, so it's easier to incorporate. Huh? So you see the Italian meringue is a stiff, is a strong meringue, but it's not. It's still. It doesn't break down, you know. You have this texture because you cook the sugar. Huh? So now I will just. In the beginning, you can do it with a little bit energy. Because the most important moment is you have to decide at when you stop to mix, because it will deflate slowly. And here, for example, it sticks a little bit on the bottom. So let's scrape everything.
To mix everything evenly?
Yes, yeah, because otherwise I will have, at the end, I will have chunks of that almond paste in my batter.
Have any of you tried to make macarons at home? Oh, well, okay. And I see a lot of people in white coats, yes? Good. That's a good sign. You may be in the right program.
Okay, so now I can continue to add. I will add a second part, and then just a little bit. But it goes very quick. It's fast, you know, but you have still to do it step by step. Huh? Otherwise, you will end with chunks of almond paste, and it's not good at all. Huh? And I hear that it makes a little bit a sound. This means I have some sugar sticking on the side of it.
Right.
The good news with that, you know, is that to clean it, you have just to fill it with water, and you let it sit for a while, and the water is doing the job. You don't have to worry about removing that from your bowl.
I had known that macarons were, I didn't realize they were that contemporary. I knew that they weren't that old. I was watching Versailles on Netflix, and they showed this party, a Louis XIV party, and they had these towers of macarons, and I thought, that's not.
No.
That's really impossible based on the kitchens of the 1700s.
So, but you have to know that in France, there are, for example, there is a macaron de Nancy. There are a lot of cookies traditional in France. There are very old recipes called macaron. But it's not this Parisian macaron that is a sandwich cookie with a ganache in the middle, you know, a filling in the middle. But you have a lot of different macarons. They are very popular. They are very good, but nothing to compare with this. Okay, so
and certainly nothing to compare with your chin chin macarons.
So here now, I could say, okay, it's done, it's mixed, I'm good to go, but here it's not good. It's not deflated enough. Now starts what we call the macaronage. So I have to continue to mix like that, and I spend a little bit energy on it to continue to deflate that batter. And this is why I love to use a large bowl, so it's easy to do. Huh? And I decide to stop you stop and it has to, you see, now it starts to run a little bit and it starts to be more shiny on top.
Sure.
So now it's a good moment. But to be very consistent, I did the same product a couple hours before with the students here. And I said, okay, we have a secret to be consistent in a high scale, but it works also for small recipes. Because how can you decide every single day at what's the right moment? Or how can you teach someone that it's the right moment? I don't have the same guys every day doing the batters. So we found a very simple technique. We have a small container. Let's say I have a small container like that, and I fill it with my batter, and I scale it. So the more I deflate it, the heavier it is, because I have less air inside. So the goal, when they do the macaronage, they think it's good, they fill it, they scale it. If it's too light,
it tells you, sure.
They deflate a little bit more, and they scale it again, and when they reach the right rate for the same volume, they know that the macaronage is done.
That's
the right
really
way.
clever.
And it's very, because it's based on volume, so there is no other option.
Which is the reverse of why pastry chefs always use grams, because volume in a cup, is not the same across. So you use grams so that you're sure you have the weight.
So piping the macarons now. So it's a little bit special. The less experienced you are, the more the smaller has to be the tip, because if you have a big tip, you press and you have like a giant cookie.
Jackie had me doing this the last time I filmed with him, and it was not pretty. And I think that Kurt put him up to it, but it was not pretty. This is a colleague of Pierre's, Jackie Pfeiffer, who I alluded to before, who wrote the wonderful book that won the James Beard Award. And he was doing a macaron presentation and had called me out in front of a much larger crowd and said, "Why don't you pipe for me?" And
Would you like to pipe?
No, I learned my lesson the last time.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely positive that one of his students, Kurt Fogel, had put him up to it.
It took Kyle 20 years to invite again a guy doing macarons,
Yes.
But so when you pipe, you have to be very consistent, because you want, no matter if your macarons will be small or large, but you need 2 shells with the same size. So I will never pipe from here to here. I start a line in the middle, I pipe this side, and then I turn my sheet pan, because I can better control myself here than that, okay? When I pipe, I stack them. So let me show you, it's easier to pipe beam. I want them a little bit. I give some room because it will spread. It will not stay like that.
Oh, I see what you mean by stack them.
So one time this recipe gives you 2 full sheet pans. So to give you an idea about that, I will just pipe one just to show you, because this is not the most important. Was about macaronage, and this is the key, After that, baking is very simple.
I did not have that great little twist, by the way. I did not have that technique. Though I tried, it looked more like I had a condition or a strong itch in the middle of my back.
This happens, It's like as I started to blow sugar, when I practiced for my master degree in pastry, we had to blow sugar, and we had to blow birds. And then came out Jurassic Park, and for kids, they came and visit the bakery, and I made dinosaurs out of blowed sugar. And they say, "Hey, how did you learn to do dinosaurs. I said, I tried just to blow birds, you know.
I ended up with dinosaurs.
So it was easy, thanks to Jurassic Park. For me, this saved my life, you know.
It's like the great story of the Greek myth that Poseidon wanted to give a gift to one of the maidens he was trying to woo, and he did. It ended up being a horse, but all of the gifts that were mistakes along the way were the hippopotamus and the rhinoceros and the giraffe and the goat and everything else. And then he came up with this beautiful animal, the horse.
So when I do macarons, we like I said, we don't use a regular food color. We use only plant-based, vegetable-based colors. Some of them are very tricky, and the pH, the acidity of the recipe, makes that the color changes. So we had to find solutions, and some colors are just. We just with a spray gun, we just spray a little bit of this natural color on top. Before we bake it, we can add, these are chopped hazelnuts, a little bit caramelized. This works perfectly with the caramel milk chocolate ganache. And, but always when you do it, if it's just at home, you can spend the time you want. But if you want to do a business out of it, you have to think that every step will cost you a lot of time. So you better keep it simple, you know.
Yeah.
I prefer, and I think the culture of the French cuisine is based on that. The simple product, the pure flavor, and the simple process, you know? And then after that, when you master this, you can do whatever you want. You can add complexity, you can add additional flavors. But I think there is more joy in a product that contains only 3 to 4 flavors, easy to identify for everybody, than one with 20 different flavors that you need a mixologist or a very specialist that is only able to identify all these fragile flavors. Huh?
Yeah.
So okay, voila. So these are the macaron shells. We bake them. So in a convection oven, we bake them at 300 Fahrenheit. So it's not very hot because there's a lot of sugar in that recipe. And we bake them for 17 minutes. But this is our oven. Every oven you have to find out what's the right temperature.
Right.
The good news is that once you find it at home, just always keep it. You know, mark it in a book. And don't try again something different. You follow always the same process: baking time, baking temperature. The vent has to be open because you want a part of the humidity to evaporate.
Yeah.
At that point, even if it's not dry, you can bake it right away. But for a better result, I would always recommend to let it sit for 15, 20 minutes so the crust, specifically in the summer, right now it's cold and the air is dry, so it's easy. But during the summer, when it's very humid outside, we let it sit sometimes even a half an hour, and then we bake it at that point. When you bake it, immediately after baking, you cool it down, and then you have to process the shell and the filling. You have to assemble it the same day. This shell cannot stay for weeks before you use it. It will dry out. So you assemble it, and then you have what we call the maturation. This macaron has to sit at least overnight in the cooler before you serve it. Because if you serve it the same day, you have a shell and you have a filling, and you have no combination of the flavors.
You don't get that crunch either.
Yeah, because the filling will you will give a little bit more moisture to the center of the macaron, and you keep the crust. So the maturation is also the key, 24 hours. Sometimes you put them in the cooler, and the next day when they are finally maturated, they are no more in the cooler, right? They disappeared. But c'est la vie. It's a good sign, you know? Voila. So do you have questions about that? Yeah.
If you were to do like a pistachio, how can you get a green color for the shell?
So it's a good question, because we worked on that, and right now we have a green color that comes from spinach. Yeah, l'épinard. It comes from spinach, so it's a green color, but you have to keep it mild. You cannot give a strong flavor, otherwise the flavor of the spinach will come out. But it's done. It's like a liquid color that is based on yeah. And it's the one that holds the best the color, so we don't have to add too much. One time I did it very green, but then you have to put goat cheese in the middle or something like that, and you're good to go, And
I believe, do we have samples for everyone?
Yeah,
we have samples during questions, but if you have a question, just raise your hand and Chef Short will bring the microphone over to you. Oh, well, there go the pastry students. Pastry and baking.
So they know where the samples are. You better follow them,
Clear the room, Chef. Does anyone else have other questions?
I have a question. We're going to leave the macarons, but jumping back over to pastries in terms of something in the croissant range. Diacetyl malt powder, is that something that you're going to use because it is a natural element, or do you consider that also an additive?
So which one?
Diacetyl malt?
No, I don't use that.
Okay. Because you think of it as an additive, or?
Yeah, so, the border, there are a lot of ingredients that we can consider as natural, and it's always a little bit borderline. It's like dry gluten in bread, It's just a part of the wheat, but it's still processed to extract the gluten. And so I'm not so these products, I'm not a big fan of it, but it doesn't hurt me when people say they use some natural extracts like that, because sometimes it's important. But for example, in our croissant production, we don't use that. But we do a dough based on liquid sourdough. We have a liquid sourdough in our croissant. And this fixes all the problems. We don't have to fix problems of the flour because we bring that part of acidity and that part of pre-fermentation in our croissant. You don't taste the sourdough, but it's the most natural way for me to bring consistency in production.
When Chef Zimmerman joined the French pastry school, and the story in the New York Times came out, one of the founders of the pastry school had a great quote where he said that, well, this country landed a person on the moon, but you couldn't get a decent croissant. So there was definitely a need.
Yeah, I didn't come because of that.
I know.
But no, I think what is great, it's all about culture. In France, we had this opportunity to grow in an environment where we have a food culture that people love, doing croissant, doing baguette. And like I said, it was just a way for the bakers to use the available ingredients, and the croissant doesn't come from Paris, it comes from Austria. And it was an Austrian baker that moved to Paris and to Broad. Yeah, his name is Zhang, and it's coming from Vienna. So if you tell an Austrian guy that a croissant is French, you probably don't survive. You will be killed.
So this reminds me of another story that the baguette was a result of the essentially country bumpkin bakers coming in to Paris when more jobs were held there, and the Paris Baking Guild thinking we need to create a bread that they can't. Anybody can do a boule and a miche and things like that. We need to create something that they can't do. Mm-hmm. And this is right. This is their.
Yeah. There is always a part of truth behind a story like that, and a part of legend.
Yeah.
About the bretzel, for example, I'm coming from Alsace. Bretzel is our symbol, and the story says that a baker came into jail, and the king said, "If you imagine a bread through which one I can see 3 times the daylight, you can go back to your bakery." And the guy had the hands crossed like that and say, "Hey, I see 3 times 3 holes. Let's shape my bread as that." And then he created the bretzel. and there is probably a part of truth behind it. We don't know. But as always, we keep that stories because people love it. We have something to tell. But this is the beauty of the bread culture around the world. It's always the result of a story. It's always a result of a combination of something new that happened or an accident, you know. And this is great. I love that, and I love always to discover the product, but then I want to know where it comes from or what's the story, even if it's not the exact true story. But the story, the history behind food in Europe is just great.
Fantastic. Yeah. Did you take all the macarons back? Okay, there's a lot of people that are going to want seconds. I know we've got some. And I didn't get one, nor did Chef.
So how did you find it? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you see, again, I think the success of a product is we have to go to the limit, you know, and the smaller the bite, the more intense has to be the experience. And this is the beauty of the macaron. This is what I love in the macaron business. We can make people happy with 40 grams of food, you know, and they will not complain because they eat too much because of that, you know.
Oh, yeah,
so
a great
and it's the future of good food, you know, eating better products, less in quantity, higher quality, and being healthy that way.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Are either of your children interested in being the fifth generation?
In fact.
Yeah, so Michel and I, we have two sons, and Nicolas is the youngest son. He's now 26 years old. And he was officially announced as a part of the Team USA for the next Coupe du Monde de la Boulangerie, held in 2020. So, thank you. It will be the first time in my life that I'm not involved like before. I said I will have a couple beers while you're running like crazy. But I'm very proud of that. He had to pass two tryouts. There was a hard competition out of that to be selected as one of the three members of the Team USA. And he's playing in the same category as I did, which is the artistic showpiece. So
this is the World Baking Championship.
He's now in vacation. I said, okay, you have to enjoy this vacation as much as you can because it will be your last free day until the final. So, but my son is involved in the bakery.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. If anybody wants to watch something that's incredibly stressful and so intense but amazing, Kings of Pastry is just something that you will not believe. So thank you for that. Whoosh! I couldn't breathe that whole entire show.
You know, if you watch Kings of Pastry, you will discover the bakery where I used to work in Alsace because Jackie and Kurt spent almost 3 months at home to practice before his competition. So you see this a young kid walking around. This is the Nicolas who is today team member of the Team USA. So
I couldn't breathe the whole entire
this documentary was done by Penny Baker, who is a very popular director. And he followed Jimi Hendrix and also some president.
I'm trying to think who else. The iconic image that you have of Jimi Hendrix lighting his guitar on fire and doing this. Yeah, that's Penny Baker that filmed it.
And this guy came into our bakery, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this guy is a superhero, an American superhero."
Yeah.
And it comes, and he was sitting in the corner and was eating all day.
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, I know I have a new friend." You know?
Well, thank you, everyone. Can we give Chef a round of applause?
Thank you.